Welcome, everyone. So thrilled to have you all with us today, participants from all over the world. The wonders of Zoom. On behalf of Paraclete Press, welcome to this virtual launch of Therese with Sarah Law. My name is Rachel McKendry. Hi, and I'm the publicist here at Paraclete. Joining us in conversation today, I'm so sorry, something's funny is going on with my, I'm gonna mute this one moment, bear with me. Excuse me. Trying again. Welcome everyone. On behalf of Paraclete, welcome to this virtual launch of Therese Poems with Sarah Law. My name is Rachel McKendry. I'm the publicist here at Paraclete. Joining us in conversation today is Laura Hogan, whose new collection, Litany of Flights, Paraclete will also release this November. Thank you to all of you from around the world for joining us. We're so pleased to be hosting this reading and conversation today. I'd like to invite everyone now to take a moment to find the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And please feel free to submit any questions or thoughts you may have for Sarah through the launch today, and we'll hope to get to everyone before the end of the hour. So just by way of introduction, Sarah Law is a UK-based poet and writer who teaches for the Open University and elsewhere. She has published 5 full-length poetry collections and a Poetry Book Society selected pamphlet in the UK, and she is featured in various journals and anthologies. She has long been drawn to contemplative expressions of Christianity and has written and lectured on medieval Norfolk visionaries Julian of Norwich and Marjorie Kempe, as well as later figures. She set up and edits the online journal Amethyst Review for new writing engaging with the sacred. Laura Hogan is the award-winning author of the chapbook O Garden Dweller and a book of spiritual theology, I Live, No Longer I. She is widely published. She is a Pushcart Prize and Best of the Net nominee, and she is a professed Third Order Carmelite. Welcome, Sarah and Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Absolute honour to be here. I'm delighted. I'm overwhelmed with the technological skill of everyone that's allowed this launch to go ahead in spite of all the difficulties of this year. And I'm so delighted to welcome everyone to this reading. First of all, I would like to thank absolutely everybody at Paraclete Press, Mark Burrows, John Sweeney, Bob Edmondson, wonderful editor, Rachel McKendry, and absolutely everyone who has helped this book develop. Thank you so much. It's a bit like a dream come true, actually. I love the Paraclete poetry series, and I'm so delighted that I'm joined today by Laura, who's another Paraclete poet, and someone who also has a deep affinity with Therese, and in her work shows how the spirit of Therese and Carmelite spirituality still flourishes today. Some conversation and more about how we met shortly. So a little introduction, and I'm going to read some poems for the first 15 minutes or so. So Thérèse Martin was born in 1873 and died in 1897. Having been a Carmelite nun in the Normandy town of Lisieux for 9 years. A brief, constrained life by worldly standards, and yet from another perspective, a full and profound life, given to love and the expressions of love, both lyrical and practical. She was also a writer, best known for her autobiographical memoir, The Story of a Soul, which she wrote at the request of her religious superiors, and finished just a few months before her death. In addition, she wrote poems, plays, and hundreds of beautiful letters. Some of my poems come from reflecting on specific moments of Therese's life, which she herself described. Others are inspired by some of the wonderful photographs of Therese, which her own sister, the artistically talented Céline, took when she too became a Carmelite in the Lisieux convent. Many of the photos are well known, and I'm absolutely delighted to have some featured in my collection, thanks to the kind permission of the archives of the Carmel of Lisieux and the Office Central de Lisieux. So, my first poem today meditates on the moment a 14-year-old Thérèse asks her father if she can enter the convent. Louis Martin, now Saint Louis Martin, widowed for 10 years, had already had his 2 eldest daughters leave for the religious life. Papa picks a flower. It's May 1887. He listens to his daughter, pats her hand distractedly, then rises like the old man he's become. Shuffles to the flower bed, while Thérèse stays seated, back straight and soul straighter. When he returns, he offers her an aster, its little petals and fragile roots lifted entire from the family soil. She takes the flower to press between heavy covers. Soon its skin becomes translucent, its scent released into the paper. The whole flower thins, transforms. After 9 years, the roots break off. She holds her pencil in one hand, sketching a brief outline of the white flower in the other. And Thérèse is sometimes known as the little flower. She loved nature and flowers and always considered herself akin to a humble part of nature's designs, a little flower and elsewhere a little bird. But she didn't just turn to nature for her insights. One of her most ingenious analogies for divine love is that of the elevator, new technology for her time, of course, holding and lifting people in the way Thérèse felt that God held and lifted souls who loved him. Thérèse was with her father and Céline on pilgrimage. It was pilgrimage to Rome, actually, to plead with the Pope that she'd be allowed to enter the convent at such a young age. But they stopped at Paris and stayed in a hotel with an elevator. L'ascenseur. Paris, 1887. Thérèse is there with Papa and Céline on pilgrimage. This is a worldly interlude, the Louvre with its risk of colour and flesh, and afterwards the Galerie, where Papa buys his daughters Parisian raincoats, blue and chic in the tinted glass. Céline is drunk on art, sees the blur of life around her as a palette to be dipped in. Thérèse thirsts for God. She wants to be alone in her poor heart's chamber. Back at the hotel, the girls take the elevator. Each feels the pit of her stomach lurch. Céline imagines that this is what love does. Thérèse, as the lift ascends, understands love. Thérèse entered the Carmel in 1888 and took her novice vows the following year. She was very moved to have unexpected snow fall on the day of her taking her vows, just as she had hoped. This is a little poem called Snow. The snow she'd always loved, delicate and white, winter blossom, heavenly host, melting on the tongue. Each communion unique and given freely, so she dared to pray for snow, to mark her vows, prayed to be given to the cold, resolved to the filigree of soul work, dissolved at the ushering of the sky's breath. Once in the convent, Thérèse had to find new ways to express love and kindness. From a very comfortable upbringing, she now found herself allocated household chores, cleaning and sweeping and so on, and caring for the less able sisters in the community, one of whom was far from comfortable accepting help from such a young novice, Sister St. Peter. The elderly nun shakes her hourglass. You there, sister, let's get on with it. Thérèse steps up and helps the hurting limbs into a rhythm of sorts towards a refectory forever receding. She gets no thanks. The cloister holds its breath. Somewhere in her body, music plays, the fizz of a waltz perhaps, a ripple in the skin of life beyond its walls. The sky is inky blue. The elderly nun, seated at last, struggles with her cutlery. So Therese slices the bread and cheese and on impulse turns her face to Sister St. Peter's and leans in for a kiss. Now, all the sisters helped with the laundry, which was quite a task in those days, very hard manual labour and not without its hazards, easy to be splashed with dirty water by a careless sister. But Therese seemed to find even this experience a kind of conduit for grace. So this is a poem called Laundry. These are hard days. The sodden sheets, robes, scapulars are scrubbed with salt and ash, and now need rinsing, rolling, beating, rinsing again in the convent's wash house pool. Every nun is needed. They jostle each other at the water's edge, grip their wooden paddles, plunge their hands into the cold. The heavy fabrics billow and contract. Their fingers burn and freeze. To keep their spirits up, they sing rounds and homemade verses, pummeling, ringing in rhythm. Then Sister Mary Joseph splashes Therese, her neighbour, with sour grey water. She closes her eyes too briefly to be noticed. When she opens them, they shine on Mary Joseph and the lilting hymn, the blue-white skin of the sisters' wrists, the dim reflections of the pool, on everything. Of course, as contemplative nuns, the Carmelites spend many hours per day in prayer meditation, both silent prayer and acts of community worship. And the sisters would take it in turns to lead their daily services, their daily offices of worship. And this was a role that Therese particularly loved. So the term is hebdomadaire, or hebdomadary. You're the person who leads the divine office for the week. Hebdomadaire. To sing 7 by 7, to lead each office with your call, to cast its Latin as a silver thread, unspooling over the bowed heads of sisters who respond like doves, to murmur the graces of the night, to stand like a priest in the morning, hold sunlight in your hands, your mouth, to close your eyes in its warmth, to celebrate your weakness. And even contemplative sisters have some recreation time each day when they can gather to chat over light tasks. And in the Carmelite order, it's 2 hours a day, 2 separate hours a day where they can have their recreation time. And there's a lovely photograph of Therese at an outdoors recreation in the convent garden. And she has with her a statue of the child Jesus, which she was responsible for looking after and sometimes painting it and just keeping it cherished and in good condition. So this poem is Photo 17, Recreation in the Alley of the Chestnut Trees, 1895. In summer, they carry their baskets of work into the chestnut alley, where sunshine warms their faces, hands, habits, and twice a day they get an hour to chat as they sew, draw, paint, or cut tough bread into chunks for the morning soup. Some look at the camera in its box as the slow photos taken. Their eyes meet ours across more than 100 sepia years as they darn and daub and smile at long comments. Therese stands at the back, an artist's palette in her hand, circling her right arm around the infant Jesus entrusted to her care. Instinctively maternal, in the midst of all the older women. Her gaze extends beyond the photo's edge. She's 22, has 2 years to live, and the whole stumbling world to gather up and love. So Therese, she wrote, I said she was a writer, she wrote her poems, letters, and a memoir on a little portable wooden writing desk, like a wooden tray. It was the laptop of the 19th century, I suppose, this écritoire writing desk. And quite typically for her, she gave her first little desk away. And in the later years in Carmel, she used an older and altogether rougher model. And I could say at this point that taken as a whole, her writing, like her life, is far from saccharine. It's not sugary sweet. It has moments of intense joy, of course, very much so, but moments of darkness too. And as one instance, when she struggled with her faith, with spiritual darkness, very much at the end of her life, she was advised by her spiritual director to write out the creed, which she did, using her own blood for ink. Writing desk. Her first is a fine acquisition, smooth blanched grain, a gift for young Jean Fleuriot, who never entered. It's as pristine as a novice. She pens her first letters from Carmel, slides the top aside, revealing ink, a scraper, blotting paper, folds her first poems, tends her thoughts in silence. 1894, she gives it to Celine, preparing her sister's cell, a welcome gift. It's little used. Therese creeps up to the attic, chilled feet in clumsy sandals, finds another écritoire ancienne, smiles at its rejected roughness. Now she works with heaviness, splintered corners, one great split rending the surface. It comes to suit her suffering soul. She pens her final memoirs, the last few poems, and a credo in the ink of her own blood, writing her heart out on dark wood. Little lamp. Little lamp whose wick she pulls up with a pin, flickers in the dark night, is a little spark in which she kindles a few more little words. Little glass inkwell in which she spits to make the blackness last a little longer, lets her write her little scraps of faith, traced with ink and blood in the dark June nights. I've got a couple more poems before stopping for a while. In the last year of her life, Therese prayed for and wrote to a seminarian, Maurice Bellier. She actually wrote to another priest as well, a missionary priest, but her letters to Maurice Bellier are very moving. She really came to cherish him as a brother, and in her letters to him, she downplayed her own considerable suffering at that time in order to concentrate her energy on reassuring him and assuring him instead of God's unconditional love. It was very important for her that she got this message to him, and she did. And this poem is called Brother. 1896. Pauline approaches her with an unusual favour. Here, she says, I have found you a brother in need of your prayers and the other lovely gift you have of words. Therese is not sure how she can answer to this, but sits in her cell with a pen, and a letter is written. Later, she sends him poems, a photograph. He writes of the path on which he stumbles. She offers her response, just keep on trying. Eventually, she tells him she is dying. He fears that once in heaven, she will see how greatly he's sinned. But she imagines her hands clasped warm in his, as he gives her his blessing. On her request, he sends her a few brown strands of hair. She holds their sparse grace, released from the paper's fold, knowing her breath and the breeze from the sickroom window could disperse them in a second, and lets them rest beside her. And I'm going to end this main part of my reading with this poem that reflects on another photograph, and it's a photograph taken of a very serene looking Therese after her death. She died of tuberculosis after a lot of suffering. She was 24, as I said. She died at the end of September in 1897. It is said that she experienced some kind of ecstasy when she died at the end. That's according to her sisters who were there. The photograph that Celine took the following day certainly does indicate some quite extraordinary serenity. And in this poem, I imagine that Celine, as she takes this photo, senses that her little sister's mission is about to begin in a way, just as Therese herself said that it would. So it's just called Photo 46, 1897. October. It's over. Therese seems to sleep, as though she has closed her eyes in final prayer, relaxing at last into God's arms. They have washed her and robed her, fastened her mantle with its wooden tibby, pressed the circlet of white roses over her veiled head, wound the rosary about her hands, crucifix, lilies, the martyr's palm. Celine, perhaps, has gently smoothed the final pain away. She senses, as the camera makes its memorial, light and shadow silvering the glass, that something important is somehow beginning. And when they take Therese away, Celine feels her absence soft about the heart, like the dawn rivering through an unlocked gate. So thank you for listening. And I would like at this moment to pause and to have Laura Reece Hogan join me. And it's lovely to have you here, Laura. We first met virtually when Laura sent me an absolutely beautiful Therese poem of her own for my little online journal, Amethyst Review, that I edit. And we found that we had poetic interests in common, as well as Paraclete collections. And I have had the privilege of reading Laura's beautiful forthcoming book, Litany of Flights. And Laura, in turn, has been absolutely wonderfully insightful and generous as a reader of my own manuscript. So I'm more than delighted to have you here, Laura, and I'd like to pass over to you for your thoughts and your lovely poems.
Sarah, thank you so much for those gorgeous poems. I'm sure everyone listening is as moved as I am by them. They embody Therese and her life so well, as do all the poems in your absolutely beautiful book. I would just like to also say thank you to Paraclete Press for hosting this event. And I'm so happy to join Sarah today in celebrating the release of her wonderful new book of poems. Sarah has really managed to capture the life of Therese in poetry so full of visual and sensory detail and so true to the events of the life of Therese, both her exterior events and her interior events. And I love the way Sarah has used photographs as a catalyst for the poems, which really work to bring the reader close to Therese, and little snapshots of verse grounded in her real lived moments. And this book is wonderful for someone new to Therese, but also for someone who knows Therese so well. It's just such a beautiful tapestry of her life. And Sarah does such a wonderful job of of gathering together and bringing in all these special insights of Therese, everything from her kaleidoscope to her little bird to the little flower. And it's just a wonderful work. So congratulations, Sarah. As a third order Carmelite, I have a very special affection for Therese. And I've chosen the poems I will read for you today for my forthcoming book, Litany of Flights, to be in conversation with Sarah's poems and expressive of the spirit of Therese. I have always admired Therese for her ability to connect to God in and through small things. As one example, Therese's sister Pauline observed her near the end of her life, moved to tears by the sight of a mother hen spreading her wings over her chicks. Therese later explained that in that image, she saw how the tender love of God had always been extended over her, protecting her. That moment is at the heart of this poem, Unexpected Wings. 91 degrees, even as the sun flickers low, my son stands tall, epicenter of buzzing children, unruly, excited bees to his sweet nectar, soccer. They have little, but every week grow rich in runs, breathless goals, high fives, and him. Even before he gets out of the car, they call his name. They flock eagerly around him, try their feet at it, kick, try again. A boy falls and face down sprawl, cries in the grass. My son kneels at his side, but he will not stand. My son speaks soft words I cannot hear, and I see his hand patting the shaking back. Someone near me says, autistic, the child is autistic, as if tears can be shut up neat and put away there. The boy sits up suddenly, sobs, I fail, I fail, I fail. I cannot think, who of us does not? My son coaxes the boy onto trembling feet. And here is the thing. My son keeps his hand on the boy's shoulder as infinite moments tick by. And wherever he walks on the field, the boy stays right next to him, under his arm. The ball bumps, the kids zig and zag, the sunset a gold whir of unexpected wings. At the heart of Carmelite spirituality is the love relationship between God and the individual soul, often spoken of by saints such as John of the Cross and Thérèse of Avila in terms of the relationship between the bridegroom and the bride in the Song of Songs. Therese likewise had an inclination, like the bride, to constantly seek after Jesus. And sometimes, as we heard in Sarah's poem that she just read, Snow, in gifts found in the natural world. Here's a poem in that spirit, The Eyes I Have Desired. Like a bride, I walk upon petals, cobalt florets kiss my arms as they tumble, soft stars beneath my feet. Panicles of lavender dot perfect above in jacaranda and sky. Ezekiel's sapphire throne of God glints. Cirrus angels touch leaden angles of horizon. Scrub jays call, arrow azure. All this falling down from heaven, so fleeting, yet my momentary eyes meet firmament, the unmoved, moving intensity of blue gaze. For one long caught breath, even the hawks swing down for me. I love Sarah's poem about Therese's experience of the Paris elevator and how it gave her a way to describe her total reliance on God to lift her, even in her littleness, to heaven. And similar in concept to that is Therese's little bird, one of my favorite images in Therese's story of a soul. Therese thought of herself as a flightless little bird, unable to be a mighty eagle like the great saints, but nevertheless completely reliant on and trusting in God. To me, this is an incredibly hopeful vision. Here's a poem which has Therese in her elevator and her little bird at heart. Transmission. Red-tailed vortex of air spiraling above the freeway, shimmering heat of 1,000 valley vehicles pulsing a signal. Midday thermal currents invite a dozen wheeling hawks. A kettle organizes like a ladder of angels, a summons to float freely, immersed in the higher home. My longing, a grounded bird, thrashes against the metal and traffic, but they rest on wings of another for a little, soar on the flow, talons and beaks above and below, on tongues of exhaust. They glory round the cell tower, disguised as a too emerald, too stiff palm. They ring the blue finger of God. The transmission requires a path. My displaced breath of words, the updraft, a wrestling reach sunward, carried high and higher. The warmth, the movement, the center builds a wafting whole, a transient channel, permeable gyre of connectivity, a sky road even wingless eye could take. Open the roof, give my eyes to the dazzle, repeat like a mantra, like Dorothy in Oz, like Mary of Bethany, repeat the need for only one thing. The little bird also trusts in the path of complete unknowing, a way of darkness, trusting God to lead her forward in all things, also known as the via negativa. Here is via negativa, morning dove. Sightless in morning fog, she laces fallen fibers of fan palm, bunchgrass, the birch's lost twigs, spends an empty creation. Conifer needles, the fox's hair, round out the void. What was cast off and left for dead, now the dwelling, twined with stippled space of eggs to come. Primeval point of departure, dawn chorus chipping the dark. Wings rustle, expand the hollow, nothing, yet something expectant. We all know how beloved Therese is, and Sarah's poem Patron, which I think she will be reading to you soon, captures the sense of why we love Therese so much. She is always willing to be our sister. Many have a devotion to her, and this poem is about an experience of one such person, Dorothy Day. Here is the tilling of Dorothy Day. Her swollen hands, red in peeling service, dutifully brooming the floor beneath his feet, beneath his spitting, his foul words, yellowed eyes, beneath his stench and snaking abusive stare, his crusted lips crowded with curses, at last goad apart her own, all the work for the worker, all the suffering for the suffering, all the poverty for the poor, all the anguish for the anguished, stacked high, combusting in an angry flare of exhaustion, frustration, crucifixion. She opens her mouth hotly. Sudden as a silver shaft of sun piercing the dim cloud, she sees a dazzling face, a mountain unsuspected, even doubted, now shimmering clear, though the rest of the land still sits sullen in dank purpled shadow. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux appears between her and the man, smiling. So startled, her unspoken vitriol flies hastily to the mountain on the thrust of that unveiled mildness. So reminded, her mouth falls silent. Even when the vision shudders, the scent of roses remains. Even when the fragrance fades, the flower sinks sturdy roots down inside. Even when she turns now, broom in hand, she feels the mercy bloom. This last poem I'll read also mentions Therese and touches on that sense of what she desired so much, to even in her littleness be an instrument of God. She wanted to be in divine union. She wanted to be a saint and to be in a line of saints. Here is substance theory. The skin of the persimmon is not what it used to be. Who is to say that it is a less lovely sphere dulled to ripe auburn pulp, and although pecked, sun-patched? The tree speaks them tenderly into being each season. Each in turn turns to teach the turn to the one sweet heat. A hachia meets its appointments, matures beyond the astringent orange sheen, reaching for Teresa, reaching for Therese, reaching for Teresa, reaching for the utter center of the divine diamond fruit, an arrow into flame, and in living flame leaps and ignites the next. Incandescent in the setting gold embrace, she gathers her ruddy round wisdom, flares her warm fragrance on high. I have kept both fresh and mellowed in store for you, my love. I can say I love ardently. I will say we cradle stars. I can say I hold the key. I will say we usher others through. Root wither, wind bite, and branch bend lead us here, a final kiss for the crumbling leaf crown, a release of the heavy, soft body. In the time of their visitation, they will shine and dart about as sparks through stubble. Perhaps you will just make out the glimmer of each autumnal halo in the dusk, and it will light something inside, in the juiced middle, near the seed heart. Who is to say the puckered, rusted red flesh is less lovely when it may be taken, consumed, and dissolved into molecules, into acid nebula, into fusion, into fire? So, Sarah.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much, Laura. That last poem I've heard you, well, I've read it previously, but I had almost sort of an image, a visceral image of sparks of fire going over the whole world and being passed on. So
Yes.
there's that sense of a continuity of whatever we want to call it, level spirituality, or a very particular way of seeing the unity of the world really beautifully in that poem. And I so enjoyed reading the poems that you have selected to read, kind of in response to mine, because I completely agree, and we've discussed this before, that I see little elements of Therese and what attracts me to Therese as a saint and as a poetic subject in your poems. And in fact, we should probably top it. One of the first poem that you read, when we first spoke, I identified that as a poem that had Therese in it, and you you said I was right, that she was more obviously in it in an earlier draft and been taken out, but to me she's still very much there.
Yeah, that was just so remarkable to me.
Yeah.
That was the first poem Sarah actually suggested that I read today, and I was shocked because Therese is in the poem, and originally she literally was in the poem because of that moment I mentioned about the mother hen. So it was so remarkable to me that Sarah detected that, and she said Therese is still there, and
still there, yes,
which I love.
she's still there. It's very touching. And those images, I mean, in a way, they're universal images of caring and of protecting someone with wings, but the way that they're presented, and the way that you saw the gesture which initiated the poem, felt very much the way Therese saw life, and was able to see the poetry in very small things from the natural world and from the human world too. So I very much enjoyed that, and I very much like the way that your poems kind of open up perhaps what can feel like a sort of closed subject in a way, which is my book. I mean, I'd argue that it's not closed and constrained in the way it might appear to be at first, but yours open up the themes that are there, that are themes in Carmelite spirituality, especially, not exclusively, but especially. So we've got themes of flight, and we've got themes of fire, and very significantly, we've got themes of darkness as well, and of acknowledging the difficult role of darkness that can be so challenging and in some strange way cleansing and healing as well. And as I mentioned early on, I know Therese has had a reputation perhaps earlier on in the 20th century as being a rather sweet saint. Perhaps this wasn't helped by her elder sister Pauline editing as she thought best, and as Therese had asked her to do, editing Therese's original manuscripts to kind of make them suit the palette, the spiritual palette of the time, which was more sweet perhaps than we would find now. But there are a number of paradoxes, I think, in Therese's life, and one of them is that she very much encountered darkness, the struggle, not exclusively at the end of her life, but very much at the end of her life, the physical challenge of illness, but also the experience of spiritual darkness, which really pushed her into an extraordinary strength and clarity and honesty in some of her thinking and writing. So it was great to see some of those themes in your work as well, and in particular touching on John of the Cross, Saint John of the Cross, another Carmelite saint, mystic and poet who Therese loved.
Yes.
I
love it that you mentioned paradox, because for me, Therese, that explains Therese. She, I mentioned, and it's in your work as well, and I love the way you use a little bird in your work, Sarah. She thought of herself as this little bird, but she was, in fact, simultaneously the mighty eagle herself. So her whole life is about that paradox. And I think you can see it in your poems as well, Sarah. I love the way you use things like the steel of sword when you're describing Therese, because she had a desire to be a warrior. She played Joan of Arc,
She
in
did.
her own play at the Carmel, and she truly was both.
Yes, yes, very much so. She was, and she was young. She entered the convent very young, and she died very young. But in that time, she actually became the unofficial novice mistress in the Carmel, not the official one for various diplomatic reasons within the within the community. But she really had to kind of develop and temper her own sensitivity to the needs of other people, the novices in her care, and she had to be tough with them sometimes. So that image of having a kind of weapon and having a strength and being prepared to fight is very much intrinsic to her spirituality, really, and how she developed. And yes, you're right, she loved Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc wasn't canonized at the time. She was canonized after Therese's death, but she was very much held dear by French Catholics, French religious, and Therese wrote poems and plays and played the role of Joan herself. So she identified with the intense strength, the extraordinary strength of this saint. So yes, and talking about paradox again, littleness is a word that's so associated with Therese, and one can see why, because she lived a short life and it was constrained in terms of geography as well as time. But there is something I find when I think about her life and when I look at moments in her life and I look at photographs of her that is quite profoundly huge. It's like another dimension that she seems to access and make available, that is difficult to explain, but that littleness I don't think should be underestimated. It's quite a significant paradox in her life. I was going to say as well, Laura, that we've both had the honour of poet and editor Sophia Starnes writing little endorsements for our manuscripts, and Sophia is another wonderful poet and editor, and I noticed that she identified little as a key word for my collection, and for yours she identified the word joy, another little word that seems profoundly relevant actually definitely to your work, and perhaps also to Therese in a hard-won way.
I think, it just occurred to me, something from Story of a Soul takes from both the word little and joy and connects them together in a way. Therese talked about the little bird's joy was those moments of having clouds and still being able to gaze faithfully toward, she identified the sun was sort of a metaphor in her work of the divine. So even though the divine, the sun, may not be apparent because of the clouds, it's a little bird's joy to still gaze. Still gaze, and I think so. Both of those words, I think, are closely associated with Therese as well. Yeah. And Sarah, you do such a lovely job of capturing that sense of littleness. Even the form you've chosen, poetry, the biography in verse, is just so perfect to communicate these little vignettes of Therese's spirituality and life. And yes, the word little does ring throughout, and that's exactly what Therese herself would have.
Yes, thank you. Yes, you're right. There's something about poetry as a form that I felt very drawn to. Well, I'm a poet, I suppose I would feel drawn to it, but I felt that I wanted to express Therese, as a subject in poems. And yes, maybe there is something about the perceived littleness, the constraints of poetry as a form. Poems, small lyric poems in particular, they're not grandly ambitious in terms of length and word count, quantity and scope, but yet it is that constrained littleness that allows for potential access to this other dimension, whatever we want to call it. Therese would call it love, but whatever it is, it's the power of something that's ostensibly small, but actually has much greater dimensions than we can logically realize. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, well, it's been absolutely lovely talking to you. I must say, I mean, we talked about life as a poet, and you know, the strange vocation of writing poetry, and about how it comprises both discipline and gift, in a way, perhaps especially writing about subjects that approach the spiritual, that approach the divine, and how one can't make any presumptions or assumptions. There is that balance of the discipline, doing the discipline of reading and writing and crafting, but also clearing a space for something that is given. And it was very interesting to hear that you had a similar experience writing your poems. We thought especially the final lines of poems, the close of poems, such a difficult part of the craft, which I mean, I'm a poetry teacher and I still can't teach how to end poems, but how that has to be something given to work well.
It has to be something given, and I loved Sarah shared that her endings were often something given, even early, right?
Yes.
That's so special. That's not as much my experience, but the ending is always a graced moment, because that's really the underline in the heart of the poem, and that's what and that is the gift every time.
Yeah.
So I loved hearing about your experience, Sarah, and it resonates very much with me.
Yeah. No, it's been really great. Yes, and that sense of the gift, the gift that can come after the discipline and the craft and the waiting and the getting of the self out of the way in some ways. And it's been quite an experience to have that with our collections.
Yes.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yes, I know that you have a few more poems that you want to read for us, Sarah. I just a few comments that are coming in here that I wanted to share. Gail says, what a joy this is. I should mention that there's a large Facebook following for Thérèse of Lisieux that was actually begun by Bob Edmondson here at Paraclete Press. And I think we have many Thérèse lovers from that group with us here today. So Gail says she's 6 days into her novena to Thérèse, which she does frequently. She says, Sarah, I can hear and see that you too are blessed by Saint Thérèse. This will only grow and blossom, but she can be tough. But your poems reveal such reality of knowing her. So speaking to that,
thank you so much.
The darkness and the light and the sweetness and the pain that you were both speaking about. And as someone who's new to Thérèse myself, I found, again, the biography and verse that you've presented, Sarah, to be such a beautiful, beautiful introduction. And I'm so struck by how the photographs and the poetry speak so closely together.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yes. Thank you. I mean, the photographs are just wonderful, and if people want to look at more than the online archives of the Lisieux Carmel are where I found so many beautiful photographs. Some I'd seen before, many I hadn't, and I found them intensely moving. And for me, they do have something of the quality of an icon. Some images that you can actually dwell in almost.
Yes.
And I've very much felt that I wanted to respond to that in poems. Yes, thank you.
Elizabeth says, Sarah, I had the pleasure of spending time with you at the Julian Center years ago. I've read your Julian lecture many times, and I so look forward to reading your new book. That's Elizabeth Richards.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you. Thank you.
Charlene also says, Sarah, I have followed your work on Julian. I wish I had looked you up whilst in Norwich last summer as I did research. This poetry is lovely. Thank you, Charlene.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you. Yes, I love Julian of Norwich. I am a Norwich girl originally. And for me, actually, there is a distinct line of continuity between Julian and Therese. Not to say that Therese knew about Julian, but something in the emphasis on love and confidence, and possibly motherhood as well. The sort of tender aspects of divinity are absolutely there, and both of them living and praying and writing at a time where that wasn't the norm. So a very striking connection, which I continue to reflect on. Yeah.
Well, speaking of her own writings, Colleen says there are many revised copies, many editions of The Story of the Soul. Is there in fact a copy or version available of her original writing? And I don't know if either of you know the answer to that question.
Well, I would refer you to the archives, the Carmel archives, if you're able to read online, because there are not only the direct translations of Therese's memoir, but actual photographs of the little copybook books that she wrote in, so you can see her handwriting. And again, I've found that an extraordinarily moving experience to do that. So that's highly recommended. And of course, Paraclete Press have the complete Therese, translated and edited by Bob Edmondson, who is very much acquainted with and informed by Therese. So I would recommend that too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That brings us to the end of our questions, Sarah. So I'd love to ask you to read those final poems that you had selected.
Thank you. I've just got a couple of poems from the end section of my book, which I should show people in all its beauty here. So Therese died in 1897, but her presence seems only to have increased, and quite soon after her death, her biography was published, it was circulated, and by the time we got to the First World War, she was much cherished by soldiers who wrote to the convent asking for blessings, and recording blessings that they had experienced. And Therese herself was recognized by the Catholic powers that be, and was made a saint in 1925, which was extraordinarily soon after her death. And really, her work has never been out of circulation, never been out of print, never been out of people's hearts. So I'll read a couple of poems from this sort of final afterwards section of my book to close. So the first one is called Letters. She comes to them in letters, a few at first, like early leaves, cradled through the summer's turn, their paper ivory shy. I write to you because her death, they gather tidily in her desk. Then more fly in, little birds, seeking shelter. You who knew her, say a little prayer for me. Then more, with testimonies, pleas for intercession, relics, medals, something of her likeness. War comes, but still they flutter, missives from mud-spattered hearts, craving a little sweetness in the midst of desolation. Her sisters sit in the garden, surrounded by breathing letters that nestle in the grounds of grief's castle. She is the bud and stem of them all, as they settle like petals. And the final poem I will read today is called Patron. Aviators, florists, France, those suffering illness or the early loss of parents, priests in their loneliness, sisters, criminals, those lost to faith who wonder how they got there, here at the table of sinners where there's no wine. Children, the fallen and bruised, the confused, those still waiting for their mission, those with a burning heart throat, gut. Those at the fulcrum, the youngest, the smallest, the febrile, the arid, the too late, the too soon. All the wounded soldiers, heavy-hearted, leaden-footed, migraine-ridden, doubt-stricken. Anyone who asks for her, sensing the still point in her soul. Anyone who comes across her craving sweetness, craving answers. Anyone who longs for a smile from the half-open door. She will be your sister, with a shield and a sword, a rose and a whispered word.
Beautiful.
So beautiful.
So beautiful.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Laura, and everyone will bear with me. I'm going to attempt to share my screen one more time so that you can see this beautiful book. It's so lovely. And also Laura's book, which will be here later on, and we'll be back for another visit with you, Laura, to read closer to the release of that book, which is in November. So thank you again to both of you. Thank you to everyone who joined us. We did live stream on YouTube today, so if you know anyone who wanted to join us and couldn't be here, the recording will be available later on.
Okay.
I also wanted to let everyone know that in celebration of the launch, we have a special on our website where you can get your own copy of Therese and also pre-order Litany of Flights if you like. If you use the coupon code POETRY, you'll get 10% off, and that's off the Paraclete website, paracletepress.com. Thank you again to everyone for joining us. The wonders of Zoom and being able to be together in these ways is always amazing. So lovely to have both of you together from the UK, from California. A few questions did come in, but I'm sorry to say we've run out of time, so we'll be sure to answer those for you, everyone. And please be assured of our prayers for your health and safety. And thank you again, Sarah. Congratulations on this beautiful book.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I hope everyone has a lovely afternoon and evening.
Will do.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.